Thank you for coming tonight. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Sass. I am the Artistic Director of Ragged Wing Ensemble, and you have joined us tonight for our third installment of Moment to Moment. For those of you just joining, Moment to Moment is a live talk series exploring what can be learned, felt, and created during this time of global pandemic. Amid the disruption, illness, and uncertainty, if we stop, slow down, and tune in, what might we hear? So before we begin, I want to introduce you to these wonderful artists who are supporting this program tonight. And Joshua and Sango, can you just let folks introduce yourself, let them know what you're doing?
Sure. Go ahead, Sango.
My name is Sango Tajima. I will be moderating the Facebook Live event. So if you are joining us on Facebook Live, just shoot us a comment and I'll make sure Amy will get that.
Great. Thank you.
And I'm Joshua Waterstone. I'll be doing technical help on this call, this Zoom chat. So if you need any help, please put it either in a private message to me or to the group, and I'll respond privately to you to help you out. And I will also be monitoring the group chat on the side. So if you have a question, pop it in the group chat, and then you can voice it personally when we open it up for questions at the end, or we can voice for you.
Thank you both. So I want to begin tonight with a few acknowledgements. I want to acknowledge that we are all attending from different physical locations and different time zones. But no matter where we are all sitting on Indigenous land. And this digital space that we are holding together, that we're occupying, is a privileged space because some have access to it and others don't. So I bring that to the forefront of our minds so that we can make really good use of our time. A lot of time we tend to use these digital spaces to speed things up, to conduct really fast business, do fast communication, multitask. And in this series, what I've been attempting to do at the beginning here is to invite us to use this room, this room that is big and also small, to do the opposite, to try and slow down. So at the beginning, I like to do a quick and slow ceremony. A little moment to kind of settle in, and a little invitation. So I'm going to light this candle to sort of open the conversation. And as I do, I invite each of you, wherever you are, to settle in, take a breath, release the breath really slowly. Take another. And another. See if you can slow down the air that's entering into your body. Really expand your rib cage. Put your attention to the surface that's holding you up, that's supporting you right now, wherever you are. Take a moment to kind of maybe wiggle your shoulders or your head, or maybe your wrists and fingers if you've been online typing things all day. Allow your face to relax with the breath. And one thing that I've been thinking about as I've been doing this series the past couple of times is how the big space, this big space that we can access outside in nature, big, vast open spaces. Right now, we're sort of, it's kind of this amazing thing where we sort of compress space and time, and we put it into these little boxes on our screens, and we're in this kind of small space in a way, even though we're reaching across geological space through this small space. So with the breath right now, if you can imagine the vast space, and allow the vast space to live inside you, enter inside your body, and create some spaciousness inside the physical frame, and allow some calm to settle into the cells as our spirits arrive into this moment that we're having together right now. So thank you for opening the space with me and being here tonight. I want to introduce our topic and then introduce our guest and begin our conversation. So our topic tonight is Befriending Darkness with the Urban Love Monk. And our guest this evening is Martha K. Nelson, M.K. Nelson, who is a writer, editor, and interfaith spiritual director. She served 15 years as a chaplain, grief counselor, and hospice educator, and she is currently working on a book, Urban Love Monk, A Year of Receiving What's Given. MK, thank you so much for joining me tonight for this conversation. Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on here. I'd love for you to start by, if you could just give our listeners, our attendees, some insight into your work and how it relates to the Urban Love Monk.
Sure. So Urban Love Monk is actually a project that that I was called to about 7 or 8 years ago now. In my 40th year, I did this project exploring what is it to answer a monastic call inside the life I already have. So instead of going away to the retreat center or the monastery, what would it be to make these serious spiritual commitments right where I am in place and sort of enter into the altar I already tend. And so I took a year and formed a council of 7 people to support me as I was living and exploring this question. And part of the vision of Urban Love Monk was always to write a book about the experience. You know, I did an Indiegogo campaign and many people supported me. And of course the year ended up unfolding in ways I never could have imagined, which I knew would happen, but the universe continued to blow my mind.
Great.
So just really briefly, and you can go online and look at my vow ceremony and that kind of thing if you're interested in details. But in general, I set out to pray 5 times a day. The practice that I did was centering prayer, and I took sort of a modification of the divine hours, and at 9, 12, 3, 6, and 9, I sat for half an hour. And it was very nourishing. About 3 months into my vows, life changed. I ended up moving from Berkeley to the peninsula, moving in with a family of 6 newborn twins and their 2 older brothers. And they became my monastic family,
Wow.
my monastic community. So that's a little bit about what the project was. And even though I'm no longer living under those vows, I find as I continue to work on the book and just continue to live, really, that I'm always kind of asking this question of what is it to live as an urban love monk? What does that mean? And that it's a question for others too. You know, it's not just my question and my thing, it's an invitation.
Yeah, and I remember when you were first getting started on this, you know, you and I connected because we had been doing theater in the park that was all about sort of honoring the darkening of days. We were doing these sort of festival rituals that had ritual components, but also story components. And we were doing park theater that had something to do with mythos related to death and dying, and that the veil between those who have transitioned beyond and those who are currently in what we're calling the physical plane. And you had joined us as part of one of those seasons, and we got to know you through that.
Mm-hmm.
and your work with hospice. And so in getting to know you, I have just been very struck by how powerful it must be to have worked at that liminal space, that space where one plane meets another plane, and to work with people as they cross over, to work with families as that transition happens, and work in some of what I imagine to be, based on some of our conversations, some of the most like time of great pain and loss, but then also time of great transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could just say a few words about that space that you have inhabited in your work.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It's a very humbling space to be, I can tell you that. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when you're at a party or meeting somebody and you reveal what your vocation is, oh, I'm a grief counselor, I'm a hospice chaplain. It can be a real be like, oh, I got to go and get another drink. Nice to meet you. Except for, on the other hand, it's either that or people are really interested and really curious about it in the way that you just expressed. And what I have found is that it's not what people often imagine in terms of, oh, that must be really depressing to do that work. Mm-hmm. It can be very challenging. It can take courage to show up day after day. Mm-hmm. It certainly takes endurance, but it actually is a built-in mechanism for remembering what is important in life. Mm-hmm. Because no matter what kind of day I think I'm having, or what kind of grumpy mood I might be in, when I am in the midst of showing up to somebody else's either suffering or great joy, mm-hmm. All that stuff gets put into perspective, mm-hmm. you know? And so being in that liminal space, as you say, with people, that in-between space is that, I call it the arena of the real. Ooh. It's shit gets real when people are dying or when they're broken open from grief. And to be with other people in that, if you yourself are not real and showing up authentically, mm-hmm. It's not going to be helpful, right? So it's a huge privilege and an honor to be with people in that space, but it does always keep death pretty close. And I want to say one last thing here about how, as hospice workers or people working in the end of life arena in any way, we're only 1 foot closer to death, mm-hmm. and everyone else is right here behind us. We're just aware of it. We just remember it more. We just know. We know how tenuous life is for everyone and how we're born dying, really. Mm-hmm. So there's an opportunity for more gratitude, but there's also a kind of, what I've said in this work is that a core thing of what I have done is help people, particularly in grief counseling, help people develop the capacity to feel pain. Mm. Because we're a culture that runs away from pain, runs toward pleasure. And then, stuff hits the fan, we're broken open, and we don't live in a culture that prepares us very well for death. We don't or loss, we don't even know how to feel our feelings half the time. And so the only way through grief is through it, right? And it's a normal human response. It really is. Rabbi Earl Grollman, I think it was, said, grief is the body's natural response to loss. So we cut our finger, we bleed, we bump our knee, we bruise, we lose something or someone that has meaning for us, and we grieve and we feel it.
I just have to say, like, your words just like touch me so easily, just like that. And I have always felt that about you. And I remember this was before, I think kind of maybe the year before Urban Love Monk, my father passed away during a show that I was doing. And I had made the decision to wait to go home because I wanted to spend more time at home. And that was like a really challenging decision for me. And I remember you and I sitting very distinctly in a parking lot during the strike of our show. Everybody was, I kind of paused on, like, taking out screws and taking apart the set, and went outside, and you and I had this conversation, just sitting in a lot on gravel, against this wall, this unpainted peeling paint wall, something, right?
Wet.
Yeah, kind of urban decay moment or whatever. And I remember you listening to me and just kind of being there with me. And it was just, I remember thinking to myself, when you had offered to have that conversation, I remember thinking, this is kind of an official conversation of some sort. Like, MK does this as a profession, and like, what's going to happen at this kind of conversation? I haven't done this conversation before. And I had this like awareness of like how this was sort of a professional moment for you, and I was getting the benefit of this, but like feeling like I wasn't sure how I was supposed to show up. Here we are sitting in this parking lot, and I remember you saying to me, well, first of all, I was struck by the way in which it did not feel like a professional conversation in any way. Firstly, I was like, wow, this is not that. It's whatever I want it to be. And I remember you saying, like, I had this concern. I was like, I'm afraid that I'm not doing it right. Like, I'm making decisions and I'm not doing this moment right, like this death right in some way. And I remember you telling me the thing that like cracked me open, and it still does. I can feel the emotion coming forward right now, which you had said to me, well, what is the right way to do grief? Like, what is the right way? And you just kind of opened up this, like, I felt like there was this small condensed feeling, and then all of a sudden it kind of opened up, like it like blossomed and opened up, and I felt like, oh, there's no right way. There's no right way. There's lots of ways to do grief and death. And that really cracked my mind open at that time, and it still cracks my mind open. And every time I think about any of these things, it just continues to crack my mind open over and over and over again. So I wanted to kind of invite you to share a bit about that notion of, you had mentioned in an email recently about that you had used the words unlocking grief, people digging down, people at this moment in time accessing or being faced with reservoirs of loss. And I really love that term, reservoirs of loss. Like, they are there already, but we're not like connected to them. Like, we're existing sort of up here somehow, and then something is like being unpeeled, and we get that sensation. So I just wanted to invite you to share a little bit about those words and how you're experiencing them right now in this moment.
Sure.
Yeah.
I love that you have such a vivid memory of sitting against the wall together. I too have a lot of sensory memory about that. Gravel in particular.
Not too long from now. Actually, it was like May.
It was a
What was
long
it?
time ago.
May 11th. Like it was like very close to right now. Yeah.
So, yeah, two phrases about what you just said kind of stick with me. The reservoirs of loss and the doing it right. And I'll just say something about the doing it right first, which is, yeah, I mean, grief, there's no one way to grieve. It's no one way to grieve even for each person, because every loss is different. Every relationship is unique and has its own contours. And a lot of people don't necessarily know that. And as you were speaking, it made me realize or think about today's time and how a lot of people are trying to do it right, trying to shelter in place right, trying to take advantage of this time right, trying to manage working from home and dealing with their kids, and maybe they're managing older parents as well. I mean, there's a lot going on, and yet still, because of the culture we're in, we think there's a right way to do it. We think we should be taking advantage. My mom, although she has said this her whole life, I can finally clean out my garage. You know, it's like, no, Mom, actually just rest. Take this time to slow down, because the world around us is slowing down. And so if there's one thing that people take away, I want it to be something about this. There's no right way to do this in this totally unique edge of the world moment that we're in, with all the layers of complexity that it holds. And I think our drive to do it right in part comes because people do have a little more time to reflect, a little more space. Maybe not everyone, certainly not the care workers on the front lines, which is a whole other conversation or thread. But just be gentle with yourself, people. You know, that don't beat yourself up if you didn't go for the walk today. You know, go tomorrow. Don't beat yourself up if you didn't, you know, do the collage that you were gonna do, or, you know, write the 10 letters or whatever. Just try to be gentle with yourself, because that's what the world needs, is gentleness right now and holding. So that's one thought. And then the reservoirs of loss, I don't remember saying that, but it's cool. I like it.
You said it. I have it on the email. I didn't make it up.
And we all have loss after loss, right? And some people have more losses than others, and some are more traumatic than others. But as human beings, you know, grief and loss are kind of a level playing field on the heart. The heart is ground zero for that kind of thing, I like to say. And what brought this home for me really was a conversation I had with a really close friend recently, who is finding herself a little cracked open as a result of this, right? There's some worry and anxiety about what's happening, and I think around in our world, and everyone has that to a certain degree. But this is a person who doesn't necessarily spend a lot of time worrying about things that are out of her control, right? And yet this was kind of tugging. And so in our conversation, somehow we got to go a little bit deeper. We sort of pulled out underneath what's underneath that. And she lost her father when she was 17 years old. She's in her 60s now. And she had never really grieved him for a whole set of reasons. And at this time, as things are bubbling up in this crack, she's realizing that more and more, and starting to do that work of grieving her father who died decades and decades ago. Now, that's a very tangible example or story, but I think we all have that stuff in us that bubbles up, and we're all a little bit cracked open right now, whether we like it or not. And so in a way, this moment is an invitation to grief and to learn how to grieve. There's so many loss is happening, whether it's that personal loss that's bubbling up, whether it's the loss of a familiar way of life, the loss of travel, the loss of connection and touch with people, the loss of an idea that the world is somehow safe, even though it kind of never really has been.
Mm-hmm.
You can go up and down the ladder of loss with what's happening right now. And human beings don't always have the capacity to handle the complexity of all of those things at one time. So I guess that's what I want to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to feel those feelings. You know, it's painful. There's a reason people don't like to grieve. It hurts. It hurts. It sucks.
Yeah.
Of course, we run away from grief. But that you mentioned the word transformation earlier in the conversation, and feeling the feelings is what actually allows new things to come out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's, you know, I feel like, you know, one of the reasons why I like to start this, well, so I have all kinds of feelings about using digital spaces and being in a flat space, and most of my work involves being live with people and being in a room where I can really sense energy and kind of, you know, take better cues and better care of a group, or just like feel easier, right? And so when I decided to begin this program, one of the first things, I really wanted to begin this program. I really wanted to create a space. And I was like, is it possible to create a space that has that sensation over these devices, this flat screen? So it's something I'm sort of experimenting with right now. But one of the things about it was that notion of slowing down, because I find that in the fast-paced, you know, doing it right somehow means going quickly, getting it done quicker, getting more things done quicker. Competitive productivity, like being at the top or something. And that, you know, the slowing down, it is a lot of times what I find gets revealed is pain, loss, like shit gets real, you know what I mean? Like it's the real stuff that you press down so that you can function fast, right? And so that slowing down, to me, it is, you know, it forces like, I keep looking at my body because my skin starts to, you know, I get this sensation on my skin. I'm like, oh, I'm like annoyed, or I'm like, I feel unsafe, or oh, I need more rest, or something. Like I can feel it on my cells, and just that sense of, are we able to give ourselves the space to, you know, sense deeper about what's really going on?
I mean, well, you know, it's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
It is a moment to moment, daily practice. And it's a lifelong practice, right? I love that you were talking about your skin. I woke up from a dream 2 days ago, and I usually don't carry phrases from my dream into my waking life, but the phrase was, we can grow new skin.
Oh.
And I don't know where that was coming from or why, but we can grow new skin. I remember Cheryl Strayed was in my dream, and my friend Espen, and that's all I remember. But what you're saying makes me think of a few things. One is how raw this time is, right? And how grief can be that way too, right? I've heard people describe it as like, it feels like my skin's on inside out.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But even in moments, the way that ties to practice is that part of what one is doing in practicing stillness is learning to have a relationship with our senses, with the body, right? So that if we become regularly familiar with how our body feels, what's happening on my skin, what's happening in my gut, what's going on with my breath, what do I feel in other parts? If you do that regularly and you have that relationship nurtured or formed, that when shit gets real, when scary things like this happen, you have that relationship to lean on, right? Because in any moment when we're feeling either really elated or really scared, or in any intense emotion on either side of the coin, the thing that kind of balances us or brings us together so that we can, be centered basically and grounded is tuning into your breath, tuning into what you're feeling, right? And it doesn't mean tuning in does not mean squishing down, right? It means making room.
Making room.
Making room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I want to ask you, so back in the Urban Love Monk year, you shaved your head.
Oh,
And now I noticed that you've shaved your head again, and I wanted to ask you about it how that, what that is for you right now.
What's the deal? Why did I do it?
What's the deal? Yeah, tell us about that action.
Yeah, well, I mean, the most succinct answer of why did I do it is because I felt like it.
Of course. Good.
I have shaved my head about 4 or 5 times throughout my adult life, and to my mother's chagrin. And so it's not like a new novel thing for me necessarily, but then I was kind of asking myself, well, why did you feel like it? If you felt like it, what was going on there? And there were a couple of things. There are a couple of things I came to. I call it the COVID cut. Right? And there was this article in the New Yorker magazine that a friend of mine was featured in, and they were asking people, why did you shave your head during sheltering in place during this quarantine, right? And they all had so many different answers, but it was just interesting that it was a little bit of a phenomenon, right? What is it that's driving people? And some of it's simplicity, some of it's necessity, but there's also a ritual aspect to it. It's not, things are not as they normally are. My head shaved is not as it normally is, even though I've done it periodically in my life. This isn't my normal. It's one thing on the buffet, but it is it's a reminder to me that we're living in a liminal space right now. The whole world is in liminal space, and that's new. I think we have watched other countries and other people in different disasters and different shit hitting the fan scenarios, and maybe we vicariously experience that with them. But collectively in the globalized world, this is kind of there's a lot of mojo going on here in terms of, for people who may not be familiar with liminality, or liminal means not this and not that, and in between space, right? A carnivalesque, things get turned on their head kind of space. So I did it for that reason, but I also, I guess, if you don't mind, I'd like to share something with you. I for my Urban Love Monk year, I had not intended to shave my head. Mostly because, I thought about it, especially nuns in the Buddhist tradition, and monks, of course, shave their head. But I didn't want to do it just to do it. I had done it before in my life, and I didn't. And then it ended up happening, and I'd like to just share a very short reading with you from the book that I'm working on about that. Okay. Some kind of ceremonial marker was afoot when I spontaneously shaved my head 2 days before my vow ceremony. I hadn't planned on losing the locks, in part because I'd already shaved my head 3 times over the years and was in no need of novelty. But that afternoon, lying on the bed, taking turns watching the backyard and the ceiling. An urge rose up from my gut to go into the bathroom, find my clippers, and take it all off. And so it was, with a knowing look in the mirror and a breath big enough to become a sigh. This action was less an idea and more a physical need, an ancient order showing itself in timely manner. Once before the mirror with a chunk of hair in hand, I understood why my body had acted ahead of my mind. The motions came out of an instinct to make tangible the magnitude of the vows I was about to take. This was a real thing, a sincere call, and yet so much of what my life looked like on the outside would remain unchanged. I needed something in the temporal world to reflect the changes that were being embarked on inside of me. Standing at the sink, clippers in hand, I was neither householder nor monastic. As with so many things, I was somewhere in between. Not this, not that, not in, not out, a walking bag of liminal. Even with my vows, I had no one lineage or tradition to call my own. I had my given tradition, Christianity, but my entire adult life had been about weaving other traditions into my heart. The truth is, I'm a free agent of the Spirit. I go where I'm called, and like any such player, the color of my jersey does not measure my love of the game. My vocation is chaplaincy. My name tag reads spiritual counselor. But in my bones, I feel like some naked Jesuit in a sweat lodge, crossed with a fair forest dweller, who sat down long before Ajahn Chah did. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks, MK. That's great. Thank you. I love that notion of the body acting this ancient ritual before your mind could catch up to it. Yeah. I want to open this time right now to our guests, our attendees tonight, and see if there are comments, questions, or just shares. If folks want to jump in on this conversation and share in any way they like.
Great, and you all can unmute yourself now. And I did notice in the chat that Jake Fong put a question. Jake, if you want to ask that first.
Yeah, actually, I can tell. Actually, I have a lot of questions for you, MK. As a matter of fact, just because of dealing with grief and loss, but especially just to the question actually that I did post in the chat. Thank you, Joshua, by the way. How do we prepare better for loss? I mean, how do we better prepare ourselves for that loss? And I know I have my own personal experiences in that setting too, but I wanted to hear yours.
Yeah, it's a good question. And in some ways it's a little different for everyone, but I think, how do we prepare ourselves for loss? Part of it is what we've been talking about, the practice, the regular practice of slowing down, of getting quiet and experiencing stillness. Because when we do that, there's actually a lot of activity that's happening inside of stillness, right? That we have a lot happening inside of us. And if we're not used to engaging with it, it throws us off, right? And so the more we can take regular time, whether it's a sitting prayer, meditation practice, or even just 3 minutes here, 5 minutes there. I saw a commercial today in between Rachel Maddow for a Calm app, right? And it just said, the commercial itself was, be still for 30 seconds. And there was the sound of rain happening, and there was like this little timer. And I was like, this is on television that moves at this pace. And they're like giving us 30 seconds of stillness. That's a cultural shift, right? And so can we take cues like that and be part of, you could call it a revolution of stillness, right? Where what happens is then when we're able to do that, we can use that as a tool when losses do occur and when big grief happens, when we get cracked open. Which I feel like in some ways I'm not saying anything different than I did before, but the other way too is one thing you could do during a practice or just at any point in your day is to think about the people you love and to remember that they're going to die. And I know that sounds kind of messed up in some ways, but I mean, actually, I mean, the monastics have developed practices for thousands of years around sitting and thinking about death and meditating with death, and even, you know, they've really gotten into it. There's no need for people to go that far with it, but if in our minds and in our hearts we have swallowed even a little bit of that reality, it will prepare us for the moment when it actually happens. And I'm not talking about dwelling on it. I'm just saying, you know, it will also prompt you to like pick up the phone. I'm terrible at this, but, and call people that you love or say the thing that you keep meaning to say. So those are some thoughts.
Thank you very much for that. I have more questions, but actually I want to make sure I share this space with everybody who wants to ask too.
Okay,
Thanks, Dick.
Thank you.
Are there other comments, questions, or just shares at this moment?
I had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. There's two people speaking at the same time, or
I think you're on right now.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
Okay. MK, I mean, thank you everybody for creating this space today. I think it's a much needed thing at these times. The thing that I'm finding is new for me that during this time is, although I've experienced a couple of deaths already, well, two things really. One is the actual physical distance of not being able to enter into some of the rituals and considerations and things that normally happen around those deaths, like getting together with people around funerals and everything else that can happen. And I know some people are trying to tackle that in a virtual space, but it's a very strange space to find yourself in, I've discovered. And I've realized it is actually affecting me. And I have created some of my own rituals around it to help me deal with it. But the second one is that I feel even more overwhelmed by, which sounds stupid, is a kind of, I've been calling it anticipatory grief. The idea that I just don't know who it is that's going to get taken away from me. I know that sounds strange, but when I've really quieted myself, my anxiety, or, you know, some of the things that, I'm trying to think of the word really, distract me every day, for want of a better description, are those thoughts and ideas about, you know, who's this going to happen next to, you know, having elderly parents and things, and a lot of friends in a different country even. It's kind of a very big space and void that we haven't experienced before, you know.
Yeah.
Or I haven't experienced before.
Well, I think most people haven't. And particularly at a level or a magnitude that's kind of off the charts. I think in the first thing that you mentioned, in some ways you answered your own question, or maybe it was just a comment, which was very important around creating your own rituals and ways of engaging and using tangible markers to acknowledge a loss and acknowledge a change, a shift of what's happening personally or collectively. And I have a story about that. I mean, I think we have to make do in some ways, right? That I have a friend who lost her mother on the East Coast to COVID. And she keeps remarking on how strange it is that there aren't these known rituals and all the tangible things that that culture prescribes for us to do. And there's nothing much more to say about it, except it's strange. That's probably why she keeps saying it. You know, it's just, it's so unusual. But one thing that did happen was they did a group call like this with family members, and the description of how it went was really beautiful, because she said that she had uploaded about 100 pictures of her mother and their family, and everyone got to see it. And so everybody ended up telling stories and sharing memories. And for the most part, everyone was there. And so it was this intense few hours of actually focused time on the process of mourning, celebrating life, grieving, all of those things together. You know, oftentimes in the regular way we do it, even if we're all together, you know, you've got Uncle Joe eating barbecue in the backyard, and you've got Mary over here mixing the drinks, and you've got, you know, and people don't always necessarily come together ritualistically in that way and share those stories, which is so important. So I thank you for bringing that up, and it allowed me to kind of share a success story, if you will. And then the other piece, if I'm hearing you right, is you're kind of talking about the magnitude of feeling and anticipatory grief that comes up when you do quiet yourself. And anticipatory grief is a great, there's nothing unusual. It doesn't sound strange at all. It's totally and completely normal, and we're all experiencing it to varying degrees. So even just acknowledging it and saying it out loud seems really important. My mind went kind of two different ways in responding to that or thinking about it, which is one, again, back to in that quiet, one of the techniques that has been really helpful for me in centering prayer, the heart of centering prayer, is the gesture of release, right? So these thoughts, these anxieties, these people come up, but can you develop a muscle, a kind of that offers it back, whether it's offering it back to God, if God doesn't work for you, offering it back to the universe, offering it back so you're not holding it by yourself. The muscle, the gesture of release is a muscle. And there's an opportunity to practice that. And that will help you with anything, right? It's like, yeah, here it comes, there it goes. Here it comes, there it goes. The other approach, or the other thing that came to mind was, rather than working that muscle, is something you're probably already doing too, but like going into those anxieties and making something out of them, whether it's cooking or art or drawing or breaking eggs. I mean, we can't really leave our house right now, but I've taken a dozen eggs before, which are now, I guess, a commodity that we don't want to waste in such a way, but like gone on a little hike and like just thrown the eggs, right? And maybe I named my anxiety or my fear or my grief, right? So it's getting the body involved, and it's when you're doing that, you're acknowledging and honoring the feelings that you're having, right? You're not necessarily spinning a story about them. You're just saying, okay, here they are. I'm going to do something with them so that they can move through. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I had a question. I love the term, the reservoir of loss. And I wanted to know, I guess really it just, because you had mentioned she had lost her father years ago, and you're one client. And is there like an actual term for that where like it comes up later in life?
Yes.
What is it?
I'm trying to think of it. Rachel, are you there? I'm sorry to cut you off. You had
No, that's fine.
Carry forward. There is a term, but I can't think of it. But you were going to say something else. What was it?
I don't know if there's any more to talk about that at all, because I feel like there's probably a lot of that happening right now, and I feel like it might happen again later because people are going to have to process this, and it's not going to come up right now for, I think, a lot. And I feel like there's a lot of kids going through it that aren't going to even realize it until later.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, so accumulated grief is what I was trying to think of.
Okay.
Which speaks to the reservoir itself, but I don't know if there's at least professional or formal language around the geyser of, the geyser aspect of the reservoir. I mean, it's interesting to try and amongst ourselves form that language. right? It's a really interesting thing to think about. And I think, you know, I think there's also, since we're thinking about terms like anticipatory grief, accumulated grief, there's also deferred grief, right? And I have a lot of concern for our healthcare workers and first responders of all types. They're not grieving right now. They are keeping their head above water. And they are experiencing a lot of trauma and a lot of loss and a lot of sadness. They're encountering things they weren't necessarily trained for. I mean, they are in the trenches, right? And it will be down the road when those things, when the geyser, you know, shoots off or doesn't shoot off, right? And then generates a lot of problems as a result of not having that pressure released. So I'm really curious about mental health support for our first responders in a systemic way. And I don't know, I can't speak to that formally, but I can name it as something that we should be thinking about.
Yeah. And MK, can I just ask you, in your experience, having been, you know, working with grief, being at these moments of loss and transition, you know, in a daily way for so many years, what, you know, what were some ways that you were able to, you know, take care of yourself and kind of step back into it each day? Given that we understand after listening to some of your story and so forth, how, you know, you have to be in the real space. You got to show up ready to be raw, ready to be real, ready to kind of bring your full self forward. And that can be athletic every day. So, yeah.
Yeah, good question. Well, one thing is to have a tool bag. There's no one thing that will do it. You got to have a bag of tricks or a tool bag, right? That has different things in it. Things like what we've already talked about in terms of some kind of practice where you're sitting down and shutting up and letting feelings arise and releasing them or whatever. Another thing is, sometimes I would have Ben and Jerry's for dinner, right? Like, and allowing that, like allowing, you know, I would often say to my folks that I was counseling, like, you know, what's a treat for you? It doesn't have to be a big thing, but do good things for yourself, right? Like give yourself those little extras. Cut yourself a break, really be gentle. I mean, one of the things that I worked with a lot in the monk year and continue to work with is this radical hospitality towards self, right? Yeah. This idea of cutting, like I said, cutting yourself a break, because we're just human beings and it's hard to be human, and it seems to be getting more and more complex in some ways. And so, another thing is I take a lot of naps and did take a lot of naps, right? Let myself rest, let myself sleep. If another thing in the tool bag would be getting into nature, right? This one we all know, but when we actually do it, we're like, oh yeah, this is awesome, right? Of course. And even if you can't like get immersed into nature, you can find nature. You can be in New York City and find, you know, something green growing up from a crack. And that's connecting with nature as much as anything else. Doing things like doing whimsical, funny type of things is another tool in the tool bag, right? Like what brings you levity? What, you know, is it a stupid Will Ferrell movie? Is it a, is it, I don't know. You know what I mean, right? That it's like, what are the things in my life that remind me not to take myself or anything else too seriously, and make sure that you can identify that and keep those in that toolbox. And other people, I'm sure, have other things that work for them, but part of it too is just paying attention and knowing that you need to have the box. Reminding yourself, oh yeah, you know, I have a bottle of whiskey in my box, right? And that's not the only thing I have. It would be a problem if it was, but you know, different days call for different tricks.
MK, there is a question from our Facebook live feed. Can I throw it to Sangha? And Sangha, do you want to voice that?
Sure. We have a comment from Lillian Otler. She says, I think that I have an unusually matter-of-fact attitude about death compared to many of the people in my circle. Is this denial, delusional? I sometimes feel heartless because I tend to see this situation and others in a very big picture terms, i.e. the human species is a small part of the larger story of our planet. What is happening now is, of course, hugely significant and tragic for many individuals, but from a different perspective, it is a tiny blip in the history of humanity and the cosmos. Do you think this perspective can be helpful in any way?
Absolutely. Is the short answer. I think it absolutely can be helpful in any difficult situation. I think a situation like this maybe pushes the limits of that usefulness, in the sense that there's such a great amount of collective suffering and different kinds of suffering that's happening, and fear and emotions. But I think as much as it can be helpful to zoom in to our humanity, it can be just as helpful to zoom out. And we are freaking dust in the wind, right? Like, there's a reason that is a timeless song, that we it reminds me, you know, of a couple of books like Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff, right? I think I happen to believe, I have an area in my book, it's called Gospel of Paradox, right? Because I think so many things are paradoxical, that it's both incredibly important to acknowledge and feel our feelings around things in order to move through. And at the same time, who are we? What are we? We are nothing. We are blips, as this person says. I mean, that's just true. It's just true. And the more you can, if you can make, again, a space to kind of hold both of those things, then you have a fuller range of capacity to work with whatever you're encountering. Does that make sense? Sort of. So yeah, and you know, just to this person, I forget your name already, sorry, but
Lillian.
yes, you're not, you may be a rarity, and it sounds like you definitely feel like a rarity in terms of a matter-of-fact approach to death in the circle of people you know, but you're not the only one. There are other people who share that kind of approach to it, or variations on that kind of approach. And if it would be helpful to you, I mean, you know, things exist. If you're curious to talk about death, for example, or, you know, because you have a matter-of-fact view, you're able to approach it a little more closely, and there are venues for that. Things like something called death cafes, a movement that's around where people get together in public cafes to talk about death, and it's an open-ended, facilitated conversation. There's death over dinner, which is a similar thing in somebody's home, where people come together specifically to spend an evening talking about these things. A lot of times your local hospice will have resources that invite the public to come together and dialogue about it. And matter-of-factness is very much a piece of that equation.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Lillian. So I wanted to give a last few minutes. We're gonna begin to wrap up, but I wanted to see if there were any other burning comments, questions, or shares at this time.
Hi, MK. I'd like to get your information, just because I'd like to talk with you further when we have the time for it.
Absolutely.
Great.
And maybe, I don't know how long moment to moment's going on, but I'm happy to come back eventually.
Yeah.
If people want to take the dialogue further.
Great.
And
Yeah.
I will repost our Google form, but on our Google form is MK's website, email, and Instagram handle to
Thank you,
connect.
Joshua.
Having technical difficulties with the website right now, so be patient, please. Thank you.
Got it.
Great. I thank you all for sort of engaging in this conversation. I think, you know, it is the thing that you were saying, MK, about just that we are a death negative culture in a lot of ways, and that we run away from pain or whatever. And I think that it's just really useful to kind of push into that area a little bit and open up conversation, and then open up options, you know, to just have space to have a greater, like what you were saying, a range to hold this time, whatever it's going to be, and hold ourselves, you know, whatever it's going to be bringing up. And one of the things I, you know, want to kind of go back to just a little bit before we officially close up is this notion of curiosity. And, you know, you had in our conversations, and in this conversation, I've heard you use the word curiosity and the notion of befriending, you know, the experience of the challenging experience that you're having. And it always feels to me a little bit like, almost like I can be two Amy's at once. Like I can be the Amy who's having the experience that I would rather not be having, right? The one who's feeling the stuff, right? Hey. little music. That was exciting. I love that. We've been looking for a jingle for the show. I can be two Amy's. I can be the one who's having the experience that I don't want to be having. And at the same time, I can be the Amy out here being like, offering that hand, like when you're talking about befriending, I keep imagining this hand like coming down and being like, hi, you know, like let me hold that Amy. So I can like be both the Amy caregiver of myself and the Amy who's having needing the care. And that I just think is a really beautiful idea of befriending that dark place or the painful stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this could be something, a good segue of what we might take up another time.
Sure.
Continue the conversation. But I think if you imagine a close, dear person to you coming to you and laying out their sorrows and their shame or whatever it is they're bringing to you, if you're truly a friend, you're going to be curious about what they're experiencing, and you're going to look, first of all, you're just going to receive it and let them express it, but you're not going to go to this judgment place, right? And how do we befriend ourselves in that same way that stuff's coming up? How do we, instead of you're so stupid, or the Chris Farley, I don't have any hair to pull, but you know, like how do you just say, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about.
Yeah.
It's a lot softer.
Soft. I like it.
Yeah. Soft. Soften. Practice softening, folks. I mean, there's a lot of hard stuff happening. Can we be soft in the midst of it?
Yeah. Thank you. I would love to take this moment to so I usually end these series, the sessions, with a little creative prompt for those who are interested. If you are interested in doing the prompt, and that would be wonderful. If you're interested in documenting the prompt and want to send us images or words or whatever, we would love that, because we love to kind of take the conversations we're having within this space and sort of continue them forward through any kind of making process or experiential process that emerges. So you can send images or documentations of this prompt if you do it to sango@raggedwing.org, and Joshua's and Sango are gonna put that information out there. But the prompt that I have today has two components. The components one is for being. We've talked a lot today about being and doing. So I have one prompt for being and one prompt for doing. So the prompt for being is to create a time and space to honor a loss. And this loss could be a person who has passed, a relationship that is closed, or a part of yourself that needs letting go, or any kind of loss. And we've been talking a little bit about the notion of anticipatory grief. I mean, this could also encompass a loss that has not yet happened yet, but might one day, at some point it will. So to give yourself a moment to tap into the feelings that arrive, creating that time, that safe time, that space to just tap into the feelings, allow them to arise, and then to hold that space for yourself with this soft hands, I guess. That's the being prompt. And then the doing prompt is a little bit sort of like what you were talking about, MK, about the gesture of release. It has that kind of component to it. Imagine you create this time and space, you feel these feelings. Imagine you get to give one last gift, and you create this gift through whatever medium that speaks to you. It could be a letter, a ritual, a meal, a drawing, a song, a prayer, or maybe you're cracking eggs, you're throwing eggs or something like that. Whatever it is that's gonna put you in a state to connect, feel, and then have that gesture of release. So those are two prompts for those who are interested, and we'd love to continue that conversations or see what you do or make if you want to share that with us. I want to thank you, MK, for joining us.
Thank you.
And we will definitely create a Befriending Darkness Part 2, the sequel, coming up. I think that would be really good.
Going nowhere.
Yeah. Why, I think that there's more to dig into.
Nor is joy, by the way.
Yeah. And then you can find MK at urbanlovemonk.com. The website is being worked on right now, so it might be a few days. Yeah. And then please fill out our survey so that we can connect with you if you're joining us for the first time. The survey is super important. We'd love to be able to connect with you and grow this program. And I would love to, at this moment, just ask you to consider a donation to raggedwing.org so we can keep programs like this alive and accessible. Our organization has been in a serious state of transition for a while now, and it's interesting because now the whole world is in a serious state of transition, but this is a really interesting transformation point for our organization right now, and we want to invite you to support us if you so choose. Next Thursday at 5 o'clock Pacific time, we will be having another topic. The topic on Moment to Moment will be performing in viral times with Petra Kuppers. Petra is a performance artist, theorist, and educator who specializes in site-specific performance and disability culture activism. And I'd love to give just a little quote from something that Petra wrote, which is, "What we call art is up for grabs, needs to be rethought, recreated every time we step into the river of practice." And we'll get some insight into Petra's perspective next week. And thanks again, MK. I'm going to close this evening out with just wishing all of you health and well-being. And I hope to see you next week on Moment to Moment. Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.